Morning, everybody. Welcome to this windy, blustery, slightly rainy morning in the Last Gallery studio. Been up for a while, did a bit of painting this morning, so that's quite nice. Today, I've been painting in acrylic, and I've been working on some little views from my window. From the windows of the house, of the Last Gallery house, and I've been working on a view from each window and using red tape to sort of express the way that I'm thinking about being locked in. So I'm about to finish these, so I'll put these up later, but they are acrylic paintings, and you can see I work with very flat colours, and have over the years painted, well, 20 odd years now, painted with acrylic paint. So I've come across all sorts of problems, some of which you may have come across and some of which you may not have come across. So I'm going to try and answer some questions. I've been sent some questions in advance this morning, which is really lovely, from people who have watched past tutorials and students. So I'll answer those as I go along. Please ask me questions as I'm talking and I'll try and answer them. If you want to leave a comment, you can leave a comment in the box. I get it up on the side of my screen so I can see it. And don't forget to like the tutorials and subscribe if you fancy receiving updates. So yeah, we're talking about acrylic paints today. Hi everybody who's watching already. Hope you're well. So I'm just going to run through a few topics to do with acrylic paint and surfaces and palettes and things like that, and things you may or may not have come across in the past. So the first one, I always get asked, for people who have not used acrylic paint before, I always get asked, where do you buy it? Well, you buy it, you can buy it online, you can buy it in places like The Range or Wilko, you can even buy them in pound shops nowadays, but there are benefits and negatives to both of those, all of those places. So basically, if you buy it from a pound shop or something like that, you'll find that your colour mixing will be quite difficult. You'll end up with a lot of sort of dull colours, mainly because the cheaper the paint, the more stuff they put in it. So they're basically using a small amount of pigment and putting in fillers, basically. And also they tend to use a lot of black. Hi, Sally. Nice to see you. Hope you're okay. So basically, the cheaper the paint, I mean, it's all fine. I've got boxes and boxes of acrylic paint, cheap stuff, which I use regularly, and it's all fine. But the only issue is when it comes to colour mixing. So, like I said, you'll end up with sort of, if you try and make an orange from a red and a yellow from a cheap set, you'll end up with a burnt orange rather than a bright orange. So, yeah, it really depends on what you're doing. If you're experimenting and things like that. Hi, Anne. Nice to see you. If you're experimenting, then obviously cheap paint's no bother. And also for mixing, if you want to mix sort of dullish colours and things like that, then you can use those. But I would recommend that if you're progressing in your painting, that you spend a little bit more money on your paints. Okay. Another question that came from Anne Jones. Hi, Paula. Paula says, morning, everybody. I hope you can all see the chat that's going on. I know that you're sort of missing everybody. That's my students. But obviously, new members, they're coming in, they're getting to know people, so that's nice. So it's good to keep in touch. Yeah, a question from Anne Jones was, I get a lot of broken lids. We've talked about this in some of the sessions before. With the problem of lids breaking. I don't know what's going on, but obviously everybody's trying. Hi, David. everybody's trying to cut costs, and obviously plastic is becoming more and more fragile, and stuff's being being made abroad, and the quality is not as good. So you're finding a lot of lids are broken. Now you can't do anything about that. I mean, if a lid breaks when you open the tube, first of all, or second opening or whatever, then I would take it back to the shop and exchange it. But obviously that's quite difficult, especially at the moment. But all you can do is decant them. So what I do is I use these little plastic containers, and I just decant whatever paint has will be potentially wasted into a container. Make sure it's an airtight lid, and also put a blob of colour on the top of the lid so you know what's in it, right? You can get all sorts of different containers, like these ones here that I picked up years ago. I think they were in the range, but they're like little lid, and they've got see-through lids. These are quite useful, but obviously they're tiny. But another thing is, if your paint starts getting a bit old in the tube, so you've used maybe 3/4 of it or whatever, and it starts going a bit, it feels like it's going to go a bit hard, then do the same thing. Just decant them into really good quality airtight containers. So I hope that's answered your question, Anne. I know that's not a great thing, you know, to have a broken lid. So the next thing is surfaces. So we've got paper, canvas and board. Make sure you keep your surfaces somewhere where they won't get eaten. I have a lot of problems in my studio of insects eating my paper, including my acrylic paper. But obviously with acrylic, use acrylic paper, canvas or board. I mean, loads of canvases are really available at the moment. You know, they're very cheap and readily available. But obviously, like I said, the cheaper, the less money you spend, the less likely it is to last. So especially with acrylic canvas, I do, and I'm fatal because I'm really frugal. So I'm tempted always by a bargain. So you know, you buy five canvases for £5 from Wilko or something like that. They're perfectly good, but over time they do warp. And I have found recently as well. I mean, my studio isn't the driest, but I have found recently that they are going mouldy on the back. So if you have that problem of canvases going mouldy, it just means that the canvas treatment hasn't worked successfully. So they're all pre-primed. So what I do is I make up a spray of vinegar and water, and I spray the back. That kills the mold, and then I reprime it. So if you have that problem, then that's the way to deal with it. Brushes, they need to be, they're normally white brushes. I've got one here. They come in student range. This is a student range, white haired brushes. They tend to be long handled. Look after them. Make sure that when you use your acrylic paint, that you don't leave them drying on the side. Wipe off the acrylic paint and then give them a good wash. Look after your brushes, even if they are cheap. I've got hundreds of cheap brushes. They're still going really strongly. They don't seem to lose the hairs like watercolour brushes do. So the glue inside the ferrule seems to work really well with acrylic brushes. I never seem to have any problems with acrylic brushes. Again, buy them online, buy them in packs. If you use a particular size of brush, then buy them in packs. They come a lot cheaper in packs of 10 or whatever. If you're going to paint in acrylic for a long time, then, you know, why not? So next thing is palettes. I use Stay Wet palettes. I make my own, and I use these old Chinese containers like this. And it's just a piece of greaseproof paper in there, and then underneath there's a sponge like that. So the sponge is slightly wet, and then the paint is put on top, and then the lid is on top. I don't like to waste any paints. I'm terrible. I use everything. So Stay Wet palette, you can buy them. The other option is broken plates. I know that one of my students, I mean, I've got a broken plate. I broke this the other day, so I can't throw anything away. So broken plate, paint on, and cling film or wax wraps. I've been selling some of those at work recently. They're really good. They're just cloth covered in wax, in beeswax, and you can put those over the top and it acts like cling film. So that's good. Yeah, one of my students uses an old, he's actually a watercolorist, but he uses an old white plastic tray. The only thing you've got to remember is to have something that is plastic and is non-absorbent, plastic, glass, whatever. You know, you can't use cardboard, for example. Well, you can, but some of the paint will go into the cardboard, which is a waste, okay? So yeah, so palettes, you can get disposable palettes these days for acrylic. They're really good, but obviously you're throwing things away and they can't be recycled because obviously they've got paint on them. And that's the other issue, is throwing paint away. I know that a lot of recycling centres now do special bins for paint. And I have taken some old tubes and things like that, and they just said, oh, put it over there. But, you know, I don't know what that means. I don't know whether they will deal with it or what, but they just say put it over there. So, yeah, you can, if it's necessary, recycle your paint, but just try and use it. So we've talked about paint, surfaces, brushes, and palettes. Mixing. So this is always difficult, mixing. Loads of tips. Make sure you use clean water all the time. So I tend to have 4 or 5 pots of water in front of me for mixing, because obviously even the smallest amount of acrylic paint on your brush in your water will affect how you mix the paint. So clean water, clean surfaces, clean everything. Make sure you wash your brushes before you use them, because often when you've washed them previously there's a little bit of residue on them, so wash them. So that'll make sure that you, when you mix your colours, you get a really crisp colour result. Ideally, I don't do this. I'm terrible because I'm pretty lazy, right? But ideally you mix with a palette knife. So you squeeze your tube of paint onto your palette and you squeeze your other colour and you mix it up with the knife, and keep the paint in a pile. If it's in a pile, it's less likely to dry out on you, because obviously the one main issue with acrylic is drying. So not only drying on your canvas, but drying on your palette. I have a little white spray bottle, which I have filled with water. And if I feel like I'm running out of time, I just spray the top of my acrylic palette, and that keeps the paint moist. But like I said, keeping it in a big pile rather than spreading it out over your palette, that works really well. Mix less paint. I know that a lot of people throw a lot of paint away. So however, if you're working on a large area, like for example this blue area that I've been using here, the blue is consistent throughout all the little paintings. So what I did was I got a large container and I mixed a massive amount of blue paint, because I know that in the future I'll use it again. So always mix more than you need. That's if you've got containers. Obviously, if you haven't got containers, then don't mix too much. You don't want to put it all down the sink. It's very expensive. Another question from Joanna. Over mixing and too much paint. That was the question that I just answered, actually. Yeah, ending up with too much paint on your palette. So yeah, just like I said, just mix up enough and collect these containers. Make sure that you have these containers ready, so that if you think, oh God, I've mixed double the amount that I need, then I'll put it away in a container. That's my only solution for things like that. I mean, the stay wet palette is good, but it will only stay wet for about a week. Okay, so yeah, you've got to sort of prepare. So clean water, knives, brushes, tubs, spray, mixing. When you come to mixing, try not to mix. I've always said this about watercolour, but it's a good tip for all mixing of all paint, is try not to mix too many colours together. The more colours you mix, the more muddy they get. And also try not to mix too much white and too much black into your paint. Basically, when you add white or black, it dulls the colour, the pigment in the colour down. So try not to mix too much paint in. Too much black and white in. People also have trouble with transparency. I have huge issues with this. I don't know whether you can see that, but I haven't finished these paintings yet. But you can see the green here and also the grey down here is very patchy. The only way to resolve that is to add with your transparent colours. On your paint tube, it will tell you, it gives you a grade marking, little stars, as to how transparent the paint is. So I find that yellows and greens particularly are very transparent. So if you have a problem with transparency and you don't want that to happen, what I tend to do is add a little bit of white into the yellow. For example, if you're using yellow and it's very transparent, you've put 10 layers down and it's still transparent, you're thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? Then put a little touch of white into, because white is matte, white paint into your mix, and you'll see that the transparency lessens. But I use a book, this one, yeah, and it basically gives you, without having to do it yourself, it gives you how the paints react. So it tells you which colours are transparent, and it gives you the colours that sit on top and how to solve. So this little book is great. There's a variety of books like this. They're just called acrylic painter's pocket things. So yeah, these are really useful. It saves you having to do all the work yourself, really, and wasting paint, which is the other thing, finding stuff out. So transparency, so add matte colours into your mixes. So you'll find that some greens are more matte than others. So if you've got a green that is very transparent, then add one of your matte greens into it. You only need to add a little dot and then it becomes less transparent. Going back to Joanna's question, over mixing results in muddy colours, but also over mixing and watering over thinning with water. So that's another issue that a lot of people have, is that they tend to use acrylic paints like watercolours, and I have that issue too sometimes. So I use too much water. So the tip is, don't use any water unless you have old paints and you need to thin them down slightly because they're too thick. So just steer away from the water. Put your water pots over to one side and just use them for cleaning. Right, so that's really, really good thing to do, to get into practice of not putting water into your acrylic paints. So when you mix, you're only mixing paints together and not paint plus water plus paint plus water, yeah? And thinning it and thinning it and thinning it and make it more and more transparent. Unless you want it to be transparent, and then that's obviously fine. The over thinning, what that does is it loosens the binder in the acrylic. So what tends to happen is if you use your acrylic paint thin, then it will crack. So yeah, it's much better to use your paint. The reason why the acrylic paint is thick in the tube is because they want you to use it that way. So less water, the better. And also the more water you add, the more dull it becomes. So you'll find that you'll need to put extra varnish on at the end. Okay. What next? Right. So, oh yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about mediums. We've got all sorts of different mediums to help you. So we've got things like gel mediums, which you can add if you're going to do very thick impasto painting. That's painting that sort of the paint sticks up off the canvas. Gel mediums, but I find using things like plaster of Paris or filler, you can do all that sort of thing. You can get flow improver. And Sally said, Sally Baldwin said, why do my paints not flow like they used to? And are they too old now? That was a question from Sally. Yeah, I mean, obviously, acrylics will age over time, but I've got acrylic tubes that are like 20 years old and they're still soft. However, they are less soft than they were when they were put in the tube. So you can either thin them down using a bit of water, but like I said, the more water you put in your paint, the more problems you have. However, you can buy flow improver. That will loosen up the paint. However, if once you put a little bit of flow improver or a bit of water into that old paint and you're still getting bits in it after mixing it really well, that just means that the paint is too far gone. So you just have to throw it away. Okay, so that's the only thing. Yeah, you just have to, if you just squeeze out a little bit, add a bit of water or a bit of flow improver, which you can buy online, comes in a little jar, and just test a little bit. And then, like I said, if it mixes, great. If it doesn't, and there's still little grainy bits in it, you'll see where the colour is separated from the binder. Then you can carry on. Often people have oily bits at the top of the tubes of paint. So with that, I tend to just give the tube a massage. There's not much you can do other than that. And then just sort of squeeze it out a bit and mix it up. Don't be put off by the fact that it's separated. That's just the binder in the paint that is separated from the pigment. It just needs remixing back in. So you've got gel mediums for impasto. You've got flow improvers. I've just got a little list in front of me here, so I'm just reading off of it at the moment, just so that I don't forget anything. You've got, what else have we got? Oh, gel mediums for impasto and things like that. There's loads of other additives that basically give you different sort of 3D effects. But the flow improver is good, and it also slows down the drying process of the paint. I know a lot of people have issues blending acrylic paint because it dries off too quickly. So the flow improver will slow down the drying time and assist more efficient blending. You can also paint the flow improver on to the canvas before you put the paint on top. And that will also give you another extended bit of time to blend your paints. When I was talking about thinning down your paint a little bit too much with water, that leads me on nicely to talking about fat over lean. Another question that I've had was, what does it mean? What does fat over lean mean? Fat over lean is a technique used in oil painting, which means don't put thin paint on top of fat paint. So if you've got thick paint on your canvas, you can't put thin paint on top of it, because when it dries, it will just split and crack. So it's the same process in acrylic painting. Always put thin layers down first and then put thicker layers on top, never the other way around. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Jean. What next? So, oh yes, I want to talk about colour shift. When you mix your paints up, they tend to look slightly different when you've put them on the canvas and they've dried. So it doesn't always work that they dry dark to light or light to dark, like watercolours do. Watercolours tend to dry lighter. That's not always the case. But if I've got some paint here, a little strip of paint here. And this is dried off. And if I just put in a little blob of, I won't do every colour because you'll be here forever. You can sort of see the difference between, I mean, it's quite difficult to see. I don't know whether you can see that, but that's the pink here. Can you see that? I hope you can see that. Yeah. So the pink, you can see, has slightly, so the one above is slightly darker than the one below. Can you see that? So this shows you that that one dries slightly darker, and also it's gone much more matte, less shiny. Yeah. So in that regard, the tip is to mix your colours slightly lighter than what you require on the canvas, because in the main they dry slightly darker. So if you're mixing face colours, for example, mix your pigment for your face colour slightly lighter than the result that you want. You can always do a test like I've just done there, just to see how they dry. Okay, but always remember that. I think people are always quite shocked once an acrylic painting dries what the result is, because it's dried off and the water's evaporated basically. So just mix it slightly lighter than you would do normally. Okay, so we talked about mediums, talked about colour shift. When applying the paint onto the canvas, it's best to start dark and work towards light colours. So it's the opposite of watercolour. In watercolour, you start light and work towards your dark colours. In acrylic, you work dark and work towards your light colours. So if you look at an area of paint, it's difficult to show you on my pictures because they're just flat blocks. But for example, in this area here, I would put down this dark grey and then put the lighter tonal values of the brickwork on top of that. So work dark to light. So paint the entire picture out in the darkest colours that are in those areas, and then build up your lighter tones on top. That's probably a thing that a lot of people don't realise with acrylic painting. So you paint dark to light. A lot of people don't do that, but the main theory is dark to light. Okay, you'll find that it's much easier to complete using that technique. Now then, have I had any other questions? Let me just check my list. So another question that came through from John was, if you make a mistake, what happens? Yeah, if you make a mistake, you can either, if it's still dry, you can wipe it off with a rag and a little bit of a damp rag or something like that. So if it's still wet, you can wipe it off. It sometimes will leave a little stain behind, but in the main, it'll come off. If it's dry, your only option is to paint over it. So you can block it out again in white or whatever, but just paint over it. If the paint is thick, you can sand it down with a sander, a bit of sandpaper or a sander or whatever, and start again. They're the only options. We talked about colour shift. We've talked about the way that something dries lighter. We've talked about making transparent colours matte. Varnishing. I don't know whether we're on that yet. Finishing. Yeah. So to let an acrylic painting dry, put it into a dry, cool, dust-free area. They don't take as long to dry as oil paintings do, but you still need an area that is quite, nice to dry off in. You don't want bits of dust all over your work once you've finished painting it. Cleaning up with your brushes and your palettes. Use rags to get the residue off, the main residue, and then into lots and lots of clean, warmish water, and then into soap. I did a tutorial on YouTube the other day about cleaning your brushes, so check that one out. If your brushes have gone hard, which they do, everybody suffers from that, so you might not be thinking straight and you've just got a brush hanging around on one side, then a bit of white spirit, just leave it in the white spirit for a while, and then that should do it. That should get it off. And we've talked about keeping paints in containers and stay wet palettes and cling film, things like that. Anything else? So we've got other things like retarder mediums that slow painting down, slow drying down. Anything else? Let's have a look. I think that's about it. I don't know whether we've had any more questions. No, we don't seem to have had any more questions. So hopefully I've answered all the questions that I got sent in. Like I said, the main problem is drying off. So, you know, the cooler the environment, the better. The sort of tighter that you mix your colours up in on your palette, the better. Little piles, a spray bottle just to keep them moist. When you're blending, I'm always telling people to put more paint on, more paint. You know, the more paint you've got on the canvas, the less likely it is to dry out. So, and that gives you more time. I often see people just working with tiny little bits, tiny little bits of paint, and I just think, well, that's going to dry in about a second. So put a lot of paint off. You can always take it off, but you know, once something's dried on your canvas, that's it. So a lot of paint on your canvas. And also we have practiced a technique in lessons where you put a lot of paint down and then you lightly brush it off with a dry brush, and that blends your paint for you, but also lifts off the ridges that are created by brush brush head. Okay, so dry brushing, I might do a demonstration of that in a tutorial maybe. Okay, any more questions? Just add them in, rewatch this, make notes. I will put some notes on the Facebook page. I hope that's most of the issues sorted. If you've got any questions, keep asking them. If you've got any ideas or links or any further tips that you could share with everybody else, then put those up as well. I just want to talk a little bit about the summer. We're definitely not going to be going back till September, and even then that's questionable. So I'm going to do some online classes. I'm going to use Zoom for some of them, and I'm going to use YouTube for some of them. So if you've got those applications on your computers, laptops, whatever, then great. It's going to be like a summer art club, and I'm going to run beginners watercolors, advanced watercolors, beginners acrylics and advanced acrylics, a session on abstract painting and a session on mixed media. I'm currently collating videos and things like that at the moment, and I'll let you know in the next few weeks exactly when and how they're going to happen. I'm hoping that that'll keep us going through the summer to September, and then who knows what will happen in September. We may have to be wearing things like this. This was an image that was sent through to me yesterday of the flu epidemic in I think it's the early 1900s, where we had a similar sort of issue, and this picture was sent to me of two ladies wearing homemade face masks. I don't know whether you can see that, but it's an amazing picture. They've just rolled up a tube of plastic, and it just shows you that this experience that we're going through at the moment is not new. We've had epidemics before, and there's images of them. These ladies, look at these ladies, amazing. They've just got plastic bags. I mean, you know, that's obviously not recommended, but But the fact that they're walking down the street with plastic bags over their heads is just hilarious. So, have a go with acrylics. Maybe I've solved some of your problems. Keep painting and stay at home, please. I know that we've been given some new freedoms, but I think generally that I think we should carry on staying safe, staying at home, and take advantage of being at home. Get some painting done. Okay, thanks everybody. See you all later. It's been lovely catching up. Stay safe, stay well, and I will see you next week. Okay, ta-ra!